Every great design begins with an even better story. Today, we have such a great story with us. An award winning design leader with 18 plus years of experience, Srishti Bajaj. It's an absolute pleasure hosting you today. So, before we get into the design world, I would like to ask you, could you introduce yourself and tell me how are you and how's lockdown going on?
My name is Srishti Bajaj, and I am a product designer by training. And when I say product design, I mean physical products, not just digital products. I am also an educator. So, currently, I'm working as the Dean of the School of Fashion and Design at GD Goenka. I've been an educator for a long time now, but at the heart of it, I still think I'm creative, and I continue to be a designer every day, even inside the classroom.
That's lovely to hear, ma'am. So before we actually get into this design field and how you actually told us about product design and all, I want to ask you how did you actually step into this, and was your childhood some result of you stepping into this world?
Um, yes, I think so, for sure. I was always a very sort of independent person. Like, I didn't have a lot of friends. I was always in my own kind of imaginary world. So I remember I used to put up furniture and imagine that I'm sitting on a boat sailing away somewhere to a new adventure. So I think my imagination was always very, very vivid, and I would always create these new worlds where I would go to and imagine new things I was doing. And also, I was very good at sketching. I think because I was sort of a quiet child, which a lot of people who know me now would disagree with. But at that point in time, I think I was so happy in my own world. And I think sketching was a great way to kind of observe things around me and put them on paper and color things out. And I think that kind of sort of very clearly put me on the path to some kind of creative endeavor. I wasn't sure it was going to be design, but I was pretty sure that it would be something to do with creative fields. And I've in school I participated in like a lot of painting competitions, won a few as well. And even though I was a commerce student, you could find me in the art studio with my art teacher. So I would be painting canvases and things, and not really worrying about math at that point in time, which is actually very important for a commerce student. But yeah, that's how it was. And I think I'm just lucky that I got into an institution which kind of, in some sense, channelized my creative energies, because I wasn't sure I wanted to do design. I think I would have been quite happy trying anything. But in those days, the information about design was very little as well. So I had a cousin who was studying at NIFT, and he recommended that I apply for NIFT, and I did, and I got through. So I'm very glad I did, actually. So that's actually how it began.
That's wonderful. And you have actually done your accessory design from NIFT, and then you went on doing your product design from RCA. And after, as a result of that, you are an award winning leader with 18 plus years of experience. So, could you just quickly run us through this journey? How has this been for you?
Um, it's really funny because when I look back, I kind of feel like, did I plan all of this, or did it just serendipitously happen? It's very hard to pinpoint because you take some decisions in that point in time, and you don't know where it's going to lead you to. But I think I was always happy doing something that would be related to my field. I didn't really worry about what it would eventually become. So, in some sense, it was extremely in the moment, most of my decisions. I think going to the RC was an important phase because, and this was recommended to me by Mike Foley, who was at that point in Titan. I was working under him for a project, and when somebody would ask him which is the best design college in the world, and he would say RCA. So that's how it came about. And I think product design was just a natural evolution for me because I was always very interested in how things worked, and why things are the way they are. I still remember when I wrote my application to RCA, I said, I want to look at how people connect to things. Like, products and objects are inanimate, but what is that human connection that we build with them, that we get attached to them? And I think that's what I wanted to explore. So when I stepped into RCA, I think that was really the starting point of a completely new world of design and approach to design. Because when you're doing a master's, it's not always led by what the tutors tell you. You have to evolve your own way of thinking. And I came across two amazing professors. So one was Anthony Dunn, who was at that point leading the design products program at RCA, and he's a leading thinker in speculative design. And that's something that I started exploring, and it was quite exciting. The fact that you're imagining a world 50 years or 30 years from now, or the fact that you would try to imagine the consequences of the decisions that you took today, both as a global, in some sense, designer, but also from a technology point of view. So, what are the repercussions of the way things are, or how we are designing and approaching things? So that was very, very interesting. I think from accessories to just looking at something which was extremely theoretical also, but having a much, much, much larger window of looking at the world. I think that's what was exciting. And I think that's what I learned. I think when I was in India, we were always thinking of, okay, what does the client want, and what are the trends, and what does the market need. So being at RC really gave me a way to sort of detach from the mundane in some sense, and take a much larger worldview, both from a anthropological, sociological, technological, ecological standpoint. And I think that was a fascinating journey for me to undertake. So that was 2 years, and it was also interesting what happens to you instead of all the things that you make happen for yourself. I was in London, and a friend of mine shared this British Council Creative Futures Award call, which is going out through the British Council and IIMB, which is IIM Bangalore, and they were launching a creative entrepreneurship program. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because I'm trying to figure out what to do next, and I want to take what I know, and of course come back and apply that in India. And I went in for the interview, and I got cleared. They shortlisted me, and it was me and about 19 other creators from different fields, so music and filmmaking and art and fashion design and textiles. We were all put together in an incubation space. I think it was probably the first of its kind, in Bangalore, for about 2 weeks, where we learned how to turn your creative ideas into something that can sell. So, this is the starting of, I guess, the startup revolution that India is going through. Actually, it was very early days. This I'm talking about in 2006, 2007. So that was many moons ago. But it was exciting. It was exciting to sort of imagine yourself setting up your own studio, and doing what you wanted to do, and having the tools to do it. That was fantastic, and I did eventually set up my own studio after that, in Delhi, called Design Bait, which I ran for a long time. So yeah, I think through colleges, through some, like I said, serendipitous things that happen to you, I think you end up doing a lot of interesting things. And as a design entrepreneur, I did do a lot of things. I was working on projects which were research based. I was working with crafts. I was working with manufacturing companies. I was working for brands, creating brand logos, and interesting websites, and designing a restaurant, things like that. So it was good to be on my own and trying to figure out what it takes to be a creative entrepreneur. Very broke at that point in time, so you barely had any money to get by. You would basically, whatever you earn through projects, you would put back into the company. So I think any startup who's listening to this would know that, I think the early years are always a bit of a struggle. But and I think with respect to teaching, I had started teaching simultaneously because I was always interested in um, uh, sort of sharing what I knew, but I never imagined myself as an educator. But there's a friend of mine who was an architect, and he was teaching, and he's the one who prompted me. He said, "You'd be good at teaching." I'm like, "No, I won't be. I don't know what to. I don't know enough to teach." He said, "No, no, no, you'll be good at teaching." And I did take that his advice, took the plunge, and yeah, and I've now become a full time educator, which is hard to believe for a 25-year-old that I was. But yeah, it's been a long, fun journey. Very exciting, very adventurous, lots of ups and downs. But that's what it is.
Yeah, that's a marvelous journey, I would say. And you have been through a lot, and starting your own startup, your studio, and then diving into this teaching world again. I wanted to actually ask you. So you told me about the motivation which drove you towards teaching. But was there any previous liking of yours which actually made you more inclined, and you're in this field for a longer time now, and you will be continuing teaching for more time, as I assume.
I was. I'm always in. I was. I think I've always been interested in people, and being able to sort of have that dialogue, and in some sense, being able to understand what they need, and being able to help them in some way. I mean, it sounds very too moralistic, but it's not that. I think I just. I do feel that I do have a knack of being able to connect with people, and especially young people. I think I have more fun with young people. Maybe that's what it is, than I have with grown-ups. So I think they always have something new to say and new ways of looking at the world. But I think I've always enjoyed that conversation, to be able to talk about what they're thinking and how they're approaching their design work, and being able to in some sense guide them along through whatever experience I've had. And I think it's very, very, very cathartic, and it makes me proud to see the evolution of young people when I see them or meet them first when they're in, foundation, and then when they graduate. And to see how they've evolved, and in some sense, what I have been able to do to help in that evolution. I think that's extremely satisfying as an educator. And I think also for me, for me, it also makes sense to be able to share my vision of where I feel design could be. Not just in things that you're doing, but exploring new potentials. And I think education is a great way to do that. One hopes that design education is where the first sparks of the new happens. And globally, that's also true. The when you don't know what somebody's doing in a classroom as a research project, and that becomes the next paradigm in design. I think that would be amazing to see. So I always like to keep in touch with all the students who I've taught, to see what they're doing 5 years, 10 years from when they graduated. Just to see what they learned and how they've applied that or transformed that in the real world. That's very exciting.
For India is actually true, because if we look at Indian education system, and after 12 people just decided career paths, but whereas we don't have any foundation, like in design at least we don't have a foundation which is taught in our 10th and 12th, which will actually push us towards it. And for Indian designers, it's actually important to have good teachers to actually have a good path for the students who are coming up.
Absolutely. Now there is CBSE that's doing design thinking, but design per se, no. So if I compare with international students and how they have shop working skills, for example, even in 10th and 12th, which are generally our education system doesn't have space for. I think those skills do help in building a much more balanced and well rounded individual, and somebody who has the life skills to cope. One of the troubles with India is that you always have somebody else to do the work for you. Like you want to build something, you find the local carpenter, but internationally, you have to do everything on your own. So one has to learn those skills the hard way. You can't just sort of pay money and hire somebody on a day wage and say, okay, paint my house. When you're outside India, they have to do everything on their own. I do feel the needs are very, very different. And within the Indian context, I think there are certain conveniences that we have the privilege of affording that many countries, general middle class citizens can't. Um, so I think we have to look at design education in India in a slightly different way, instead of just kind of adopting how international institutions are preparing or expecting people to get prepared. So it's important to take the thinking, but still have a very strong understanding of the pragmatism of being in India. I think that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. You just mentioned previous in a conversation, you mentioned about the social connection which you have with the people with whom you're interacting with, which brings me towards the next topic that you actually gave a talk at TEDx Delhi, where you talked about empathy and urban empathetic system. So could you brief us about it and tell more how it's actually important for a designer to cultivate?
Thank you for that question. I think it's very, very important that we as individuals, not just designers, have a sense of empathy with ourselves, with the people we are surrounded with, and also systems beyond individuals. So, do you have sympathy with the immediate environment you're in? And empathy is very different than sympathy. I think a lot of people confuse the two. Empathy is truly about walking in somebody's shoes. So if somebody is going through something, do you have the ability to connect with them and truly understand what is happening? So if you take any urban situation, let's say you, and these are things that we've been bemoaning for years. The idea of potholes in our street, or the idea of garbage disposal. I mean, those are large systemic problems, and oftentimes we tend to blame like the authorities. Oh, they don't pick it up, they don't do this, or look at this person, he's throwing this away this way, or normal conversations that I've come across. However, I find that for one to have long-term solutions, we need to go beyond just the superficial. We need to understand what is the behavior that prompts somebody to throw garbage on the street. What is the behavior, or what is the mindset rather, that makes it much harder to implement changes in a country like India? Why are we so resistant to change, mending our ways? And I think for anybody to be able to create a solution that is going to be sustainable from not just an ecological standpoint, but both economically viable, but also sustainable in the sense that it has to run on its own. So one needs to really understand what goes on instead of just assuming certain things, or philosophizing without really understanding the real reason, the root cause of something. So, like we say, don't treat the symptoms, treat the cause. Empathy is a great tool for you to really get to the cause. In design, when you do design research, there is this tool called the 5 Ws and 1 H. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it talks about when, what, how. Sorry, how comes later, but when, what, why, where, when, and how. So that's a great tool to use to understand what's going on, and go from a space of empathy, go from a space that you really want to understand what's going on, instead of putting your own bias of how things are going to be, or what somebody's going to say, or why somebody says this. Go with an open mind and try to understand what's really going on. And sometimes, the answers are the most surprising. I'll give you an example of this. I often quote this example to my students, and I was doing a research project, and I was interviewing this gentleman who was basically a volunteer worker in a local self help group. I mean, this gentleman probably earns like 15,000 rupees a month. So not a very, very high income package. And they live in a small apartment in JJ, what used to be the JJ colony. So very meager, very humble household. And when I was interviewing him, he was very proud of the fact that he had bought something for his older brother who had actually helped put him through college. And I wanted to see what is it that he had got. And he takes out this box of Salvatore Ferragamo shoe. And I was absolutely surprised. I'm like, how did this gentleman find a way to buy a Ferragamo shoe? I mean, I would think twice before investing in such an expensive shoe. And he had actually collected money because there is that sense of connection with family and how Indian culture really is. You know, you respect your elders and you repay in kind in some sense. So, you know, those nuances of India that if I were to just look at the shoe and assume this person, I would simply, come away with the fact, oh, he must have saved money. But what prompted him to do all of that was a far richer story and much more meaningful as a connection. And later he said, well, don't tell my brother I spent so much money because otherwise he'll scold me. So I've told him that this is his quote. I've told him that you should that I bought this in discount and it costed me like 5,000 rupees. So he wants to give this brother this amazing gift as a return for all that he had helped him through without telling him how expensive it is. So that's the dichotomy of being in India. And I guarantee you, it'll be hard for somebody looking outside in without really sort of digging deeper to understand what happened and why somebody would do that. So those nuances are important to discover, and I think empathy is a great way of doing it.
Yep, in India, we do have a greater connection with actually with our neighbors also. We have a greater sense of responsibility and a greater connection with them, which makes India a way different culturally heritage country than any other. With that, I would like to ask you. So, we actually are talking about designers and how design is actually affecting India. Now, I want to ask you that how do you look at the future of designers in India? Because in India, the design has just started over 2 decades and it hasn't boomed a lot. And we do have much more scope. But do you feel that people may migrate to other countries as they're paying a lot and that may suffer future designers in India?
So I think what is going to be Indian design or what is Indian design is a huge conundrum for a lot of designers, and I don't think anybody can answer it very easily. Just because India is such a complex country, I think you have different Indias actually. So it's very hard to say that this is what it's going to be. But what I hope it is what I can answer. For me, there are two very distinct, I guess, paths that I see designers take. So one is your more lifestyle and market driven design work, which I think, considering that India is booming, it's going to go bigger. I mean, just look at the number of independent design brands that have opened in the last 5 years doing amazing stuff. And I do see a unique sensibility evolving where there is a very very, I guess, easy confluence. And I say easy because people are able to do this with much more fluidity. The confluence between a Western aesthetic but an Indian taste. So the colors, the palette, the way it's constructed, the way it's manufactured, price points. I think those are very, very unique to India. So it's especially the contemporary aesthetic is an interesting blend of both Western and Indian influences. So I see this as a lifestyle driven trend. So whether it's fashion, whether it's haute couture or pret, or whether you're looking at products, accessories, so the furniture, interiors, architecture. So one is that. I also see a revival of a certain appreciation for the Indian aesthetic. So you see, there's a resurgence in how bricklaying used to happen traditionally. There's also a resurgence in Ayurvedic practices, and I think that also permeates itself through how people approach design or what sensibilities your audience is looking for. So that's, again, like I said, it's lifestyle driven. The second is where I find probably a lot more work needs to be done is more need based design. So India, considering, is such a wide country, and there are a lot of concerns that plague us. I don't see a lot of private and government partnership in being able to tackle some of these larger issues. So I think Prime Minister's sanitation program has been very, very successful, and I wish it had designers participating a lot more, because they would have approached the entire process in a very different way and found out more creative and interesting ways of approaching sanitation and hygiene as a system, not just as creating a toilet for an individual. So that's one. So there are a lot of concerns in India. I think there's a lot of work happening at the bottom of the pyramid. There are companies that are also both UX companies. There are companies that are working in artificial intelligence and machine learning who are now collaborating with designers and looking at tackling some of these harder concerns. I'll give you an example of this company that I discovered, and they're doing amazing work. It's called Vadwani AI, which are based out of Bangalore. So while they are a AI, which is artificial intelligence company, they have a lot of designers working for them. So designers for doing research, designers for coming up with solutions. So I think there's real interest and there's real opportunity in some of these transdisciplinary fields to come together and try and tackle some of the wicked problems of India. Wicked problems, of course, as we know, are the hard to do, very difficult to resolve, complicated, complex, sophisticated concerns, which is difficult for one designer to solve, or the fact that it could be done today. It takes a horizon of at least 5 years to be able to make any headway. So there, I would like to see a lot more designers working, and I think we definitely need a public-private partnership for this. We need the governments to come together with private designers and studios and agencies and try and find solutions that are not just bottom of the pyramid, but urban, and they're also relevant and long lasting and well designed. So I would like to see a lot more work there, and I definitely feel that India, in terms of working with the private individuals with respect to design, is probably the furthest away, because everywhere else there's a lot of funding from the government to work on interesting public domain projects. So that's what I'd like to see a lot more of.
Yep, that's true. As you told about the sanitation project which was conducted by PM Modi, there we can look at the solution which was presented by the engineers and who developed it, and the customer who actually needed that. The bridge wasn't built between them. The bridge can actually be built by a designer who can make that product accessible, more convenient to use, and have a better grasp over it, so that a common person can also learn and how to use it and make it way more accessible and better to use.
Absolutely. I can't remember the name of this company, but they're based out of Bombay, and they did a survey where they looked at how many bathrooms that have been constructed are being used, and they found out that in certain well, not a few but a lot of villages, even though the bathrooms have been constructed, but people were still preferring to go outside to relieve themselves, and they started to do research to understand what was it that was happening, why weren't they not using these toilets. And it turns out that the toilets didn't have a window. So for people who are used to sitting outside in the open and feel they can see who's coming, to suddenly be put into a dark block with no access to the environment outside, they felt isolated. And so by simply putting a large window, a for ventilation, but also for them to be able to see the sky or to be able to see outside, they improved the number of people using the washroom. So it's such a small observation, but if somebody hadn't gone to understand, and this is where empathy comes in again, to understand why is it that people are not using it. And I think designers are very, very good at addressing some of these minutiae. So yes, it would be fantastic if designers were more deeply involved in projects, for sure.
Yeah, that's true. A designer can make a small slight change which can have a greater impact on the complete product itself. Moving on to my next question, I would like to ask you that you have actually worked on multiple projects. So, could you tell me one of your projects which you are fond of and are proud of?
Oh gosh, it's hard to pick through all those projects. But okay, so I think for me, one of the projects that I'm very proud of is probably the one that where I had the most learning. I started doing these sort of range of carts as part of the studio. And it's really interesting, the story of the carts, because it really started as something that I wanted to keep as a reception table in my studio. So I found this discarded cart near a tree. On a tree near my studio, and I decided, well, that's interesting, I could do a DIY and refurbish it. And I did that. I created one for my studio, and those were, I put it on Facebook, and I was just showing off a nice reception table for my studio. And what's interesting is I started to get orders for it, where people are like, well, can I buy one of those things? And it's the thing that toppled a cart, I guess. So I did an entire collection of carts, small one, big ones, the ones that you could sit on, lie on, like a day bed. And I think that collection, just like I said, things happen to you. You don't always plan for them. And this is a great example of things that happened. And it was interesting how it kind of found a life of its own, because I never anticipated that people would want to buy it. I was very shocked when people said, well, they want to pay money for something that I made just for a studio. So I think that's a project that really I'm very proud of, because I had a lot of fun working on it. And it really just help me understand that one also has to find value in even the small things that one does, because you don't know what it might lead to. And I think that's a philosophy that stayed with me for a long, long time. And I always bring that to the classroom also. When as a student, you come to your faculty with like these doodles, and they don't mean anything to you, and you can't see the potential of it, but somebody else can. And I think as a faculty, that's an important skill to have, to be able to spot potential of these sort of budding ideas and not dismiss them just because they're not, I don't know, sketched well or presented well. And I think that was a great learning for me. So I always, I think from that moment on, I don't think I ever say no to projects. I always sort of take them on board and see what can come out of it. And I think that's become almost like a philosophy for me as a designer and as a creative. So it was a great learning curve for me. And to see it become that popular and be appreciated. And now you see those carts, like I haven't created them, but you see versions of the cart everywhere. So maybe I sometimes feel maybe I had some small role to play in starting that trend. So yeah, that was fun.
That's true. As a designer, you should actually touch upon multiple projects as you can. You get to interact with much more new people, get to learn more about it, and obviously, you can be the next new hit.
That's true. That's true.
So with that, I would like to ask you. So you right now mentioned about as a faculty has to pinpoint the budding ideas and budding solutions which come out of the students. So did you had any such experience of any of your students coming up with a great idea and which went on to become a hit?
Oh, lots of them all the time. I feel that any designer will tell you that the idea is just a starting point. So it's important to spot the right ideas, but it's also important to harness them. So to be able to follow the process and reach the potential of an idea is just as important. So I think there are enough instances where a small idea could completely change the way you approach your work. I mean, I know for a fact there are lots of projects that were classroom projects that went on for students to go and win awards. They certainly weren't designed to win awards, but because the process was strong, and because the student really worked to translate that into something credible, the results are for one to see. I mean, there are tons of ideas, and it's really interesting. I mean, I used to work with Pearl until March this year, which I left. So there was I started introducing material exploration as part of was sustainable materials, so biomaterials basically, as part of a program, and I invited a faculty to come and teach that. It and today one of the students, she has made packaging with orange peel. I mean, all credit goes to her. I'm not taking anything away from the student or from the faculty who taught that program, but today she's being covered by Brute and by Good India and newspapers, looking at the work that she has done, which again, like I said, started as a classroom project. So really, it's about identifying some gems and polishing them along the way, and just really helping students harness it and find the real opportunity with those projects. I think yeah, I mean, I probably could name a few more, but there are really quite a few that have taken that route. So I'm very proud of those students for sure.
And that's great to hear. With that, I would like to ask you. So, we actually talked about how the projects and how designing actually works. But as a student, when he transforms from being a student to being actually a designer in the world, there are much more challenges which he faces, like right from dealing with the clients, time management, when to say no, how to actually pick a right projects. So, how would you advise those students on this topic?
You've actually picked a very important aspect because a lot of students struggle with it. I think the transition from being in the safe space of a college or a design institute to suddenly being having responsibility thrust on you, where a decision that you make can have an impact on a client's bottom line. I mean, that's a big responsibility to shoulder. Um, and I always advise my students that even when you're in college, don't think of yourself as a student, think of yourself as a young professional. Behave as you would a young professional would. So the fact that you every day you're coming to college, don't think that it's just fun. Yes, you must have fun, but also assume that you're coming to work. Do the work, put in the hours, check out at night as if you have left work. And I think that discipline and that rigor really helps in transitioning from suddenly sitting and having no deadlines to having deadlines 2 days later. So it's a skill, it's a muscle you build over the years. I think the students who spend their formative years in college having more fun than doing work probably struggle more with it because they haven't had that they haven't built for themselves that discipline, or at least some kind of a routine for work. I think they struggle with it the most. The students who have been able to build that rigor for themselves, I think they transition much more smoothly. So every day counts. I mean, there's a reason why design doesn't have books, is because you have to do the work every day. If you are able to do that, then transitioning into the professional world is not that difficult because every design institute is a 9 to 5, literally. It's meant to ape the professional work environment. The way the faculty gives you crit is meant to imitate the feedback you are going to get from a client or your boss. The reason why it's critical is because they're not going to bother with your feelings. They will simply tell you they don't like it, and you have to understand why they don't like it and how to improve on it. So I think, as far as possible, design institutes and their environment is, in some sense, structured to give you that sense of being in the professional environment. But of course, you're not getting a salary, and your decisions are perhaps not implemented at large scale. I think the risks are higher once you step into the professional world. So I think one has to take that very, very seriously. You can't just uh, not feel like doing work, which a lot of designers do talk about. But I think creativity also needs structure. I mean, you're not how do I think that's one of the ways I also differentiate art and design. Because in design you have a client that you're answerable to, and art you have much more creative freedom in that sense. But structure is important in both. Even for an artist, they have to know what works for them, what doesn't work for them. For a designer, it's very important to know how they're going to produce the work, because a company is not going to give you days on end to sit and mull over an idea. They want results. So I think that discipline is very important, and I really call it professionalism. I think for me that's the definition of being professional, to be able to produce when work needs to be produced. It's not a flash in the pan. There's a reason why you're taught design process. There is a reason why there's a structure in place. It's for you to not wait for an inspiration, but to go and find it and to apply it. I've worked long enough to know that you can get great ideas on demand. You just need to know how to get there. Not all of them will be the best idea you've ever had, but it's better, as they say in design, to make fast, fail quickly, and then revisit and redesign. So yeah, don't wait for that brilliant idea. You might be waiting for years. Move on with what you have and keep improving. I mean, design is an iterative process for that reason. You create something, it doesn't work, you improve on it and you make it better. So it's not about the perfect idea, it's about the perfect execution. So that's very, very important.
Yeah, as you actually mentioned about redesigning, I had one more question about it. So people do tend to get into a cycle of design, get a feedback, redesign, get a feedback, redesign, and which just goes on endless. So how would you break that cycle to get a perfect product without even compromising? I guess mostly the answer may come out to be empathy, like knowing the client, but there's something which client also offers, which is like his feedback, whereas he doesn't actually know the basics of design, but still he has his own opinion. So how would you deal with that?
See, I think, yes, designers can tend to get into an endless loop. And I think that's great when you're in college, when you have the liberty of time. But when you're working in the industry, that's definitely not there. So one has to know when you've reached a point where you have a fairly decent product that can launch. Believe me, if one was able to create the perfect product, we wouldn't need any more products, right? Everything would have already been designed, everything would have been done. You wouldn't need anything new. But the fact that there is opportunity to improve, the next product improves on what came before it, tells you the fact that if you there is no perfect product. So knowing that is very, very important. The client knows it, your boss knows it. I think it's just for the designers to realize that it doesn't work like that. I mean, just look at even Apple. A great product, not the perfect product. So every new iteration of an iPhone is an improvement on what came before. But it is important to get the product out there so that you can get real feedback. Getting feedback with just us as designers playing with something is it's great, but it's not enough. So no, only when you put it out there in the market, in the hands of the consumers, will you get real feedback on how successfully you've been able to deliver what needed to be done. And believe me, you have to prioritize. So work with your client and boss, make a list of priorities, that if there are 10 things you want in a product, what are the five most important things that you need to hit first? So if you're able to create something that has those five criticalities in place, and then you look at what other five are you able to accommodate. You may not be able to get a perfect 10, but you might be able to get an imperfect 7 or an imperfect 8, which is also great for maybe the first beta of the project or the product. So go with it, put it out in the market, get feedback, and you'll always have time to have a client come back to you and say, hey, okay, we've done this, let's look at the next version of this product. And therefore you see, likes of Samsung and Apple and Videocon and Philips, they've been producing, let's say, refrigerators and bulbs and electronic goods for a very long time. Would you say they've reached perfection? No. For many years, they're still improving, and I think that's the name of the game. So get it out there, get the feedback. You will always have time to make a better one next time if you do a good job of the existing one. So don't wait for the perfect product to suddenly transpire. That might take years. You'll get old uh, without anything finalized. So that's very, very important. So, to your question about how to work with clients, I think this is my solution. Work with your clients. Don't assume that what they're saying is nonsense or they don't understand about design. What they do understand is the market. Okay. The intent is not to have them as a designer. The intent is to take from them what they have to offer. What insights then they can they provide you for your project to make it better? That's the work of a client. That's the work of a boss who is able to have an overview and much more experience than you have, to give you insights that you may not be able to see. So both have something to offer, and I think if you really try to understand what they're saying, sometimes people may not be good at expressing themselves, so things get lost in expression. But it's more important to get to the content, the context, and the intent of what you're saying. Understand why they're saying it. For me, why is a very, very important question. Ask the five whys. If somebody says A is happening because of B, ask them why. Why is B happening? They will say B is happening because of C. Ask them again, why is C happening? C is happening because of D. So ask them why D is happening, and they will say D is happening because of E. So you need to get those five whys in place to truly understand what is the real intent there. And don't get caught up in words. I think designers also get offended very easily. Uh, I think there's no point in getting offended. We're all just trying to sort of create something new. So jump on the bandwagons. Be a team player. Very, very important.
So to summarize what you actually told right now, I would see that clients, our clients as a designer clients, can we both can be a team rather than having them look as a client. We can have them as a team with having the customer who is actually our client, and not the client who is paying us, because that may create a better bond cli- um, between the client and the designers to give up a better product to the customer.
Absolutely. Very, very important. I think, you could be a great designer, but if you don't have a client to take your designs to the market, you could just be sitting in your room and not doing anything. So realize the importance of the client. They're important.
Yep. With that, I would like to ask you the last question for today. Uh, do you have any advice for the budding artist or budding designer? Sorry.
I think I've given a lot of advice through this conversation, but I think have patience. It's very, very important. For me, what I see today is because of social media, because everything is happening so fast, I think we are losing the ability to work slow and steady. I think it's a very important skill, especially when you look at projects that are a little bit more long term. I mean, these are not projects that are going to transpire and give you results in 2 months' time or 3 months' time. Some might take 2 years. And to do real work, you really need to have the patience and the perseverance to see it through. So we all get excited by the great ideas. I still do. When I think up of a nice idea, I get excited and I want to get it out there. And I also get frustrated sometimes that, oh my God, it's not happening. But then one has to realize that actually you have to slow down. You have to look at it from a 360-degree perspective. You have to dig deeper. We call students that we like to teach or create a T-shaped learner. What that means is that you have the breadth and the depth in whatever you are learning, whatever kind of designer you are going to become. So it's very, very important to have that depth as well. And yeah, persevere, have patience. It takes time. Anything worth doing, okay, is worth doing well. And that requires time and patience. I think we often as designers forget that. We get excited, we lose sight of the fact that it's the work needs to be done. So yeah, just batten down the hatches and keep at it, and that's when you produce great work.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for coming on our show. It was my pleasure hosting you today, and it was a lovely conversation.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Path. It was my pleasure, and I hope that we can excite and inspire many more artists and designers to follow their heart. Thank you.
Congratulations to all of you who made it till the end. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I really hope you liked it. If you did, please leave us a review on our YouTube comment section. And if you come up with any questions while listening to this podcast, you can add a comment on Instagram or YouTube, and we will get back to you and help you as much as possible. You can find us on Instagram or our website by the name arttown.store. So do connect with us. We're truly excited to converse with you.